Hello and welcome back to the Crime Folio. Thank you for joining us as we step into the shadows of absolute faith and charismatic control. Humanity possesses a profound need for answers, for a sense of belonging, for a promise of salvation from the chaos of the world. But what happens when that search for meaning leads down a path of total surrender? When a charismatic leader's vision becomes a sealed reality, and the only escape offered is a final, catastrophic exit. Tonight, we explore the chilling phenomenon of destructive cults, examining the moments when belief becomes a blueprint for self-destruction. Case 1, the Heaven's Gate mass suicide. On March 26, 1997, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department received an anonymous tip. The caller, a former member of a reclusive religious group, reported that a mass suicide had taken place inside a sprawling, 9,200-square-foot mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, an affluent suburb known for its horse ranches and lavish estates. The group called themselves Heaven's Gate. The caller, Rio D'Angelo, had just received a package in the mail containing a videotape and a letter. The message was clear. By the time he was watching it, everyone he had once called family would be gone. When officers arrived at the mansion, located at 18241 Colina Norte, they were initially met with silence. The air was still. There were no signs of a struggle, no sounds of distress. A strange, sweet, decaying odor hung in the air. Upon entering the home, they were confronted with a scene of almost surreal order and tranquility. A scene that would be seared into the public consciousness. Lying peacefully in bunk beds and on mattresses throughout the dark, cavernous house were the bodies of 39 people, 21 women and 18 men. Each was dressed in an identical uniform, a black, long-sleeved shirt, black pants, and brand new, black and white Nike Decade sneakers. Each body was meticulously covered with a square, purple shroud. Beside each bunk was a small, packed suitcase. On their sleeves, they wore a patch that read, Heaven's Gateway Team. They looked not like victims of a violent end, but like travelers, asleep, waiting for a departure that had already occurred. They had not been murdered. They had all willingly left. The question that echoed through the silent mansion, and soon across the world, was why? To understand the answer, we must go back more than 2 decades, to the unlikely meeting of a disillusioned music professor and a curious nurse. The story of Heaven's Gate is the story of its 2 founders, Marshall Herff Applewhite and Bonnie Lou Nettles. Applewhite, born in 1931, was a charismatic and talented man. The son of a Presbyterian minister, he had a gifted tenor voice, pursued a career in opera, and eventually became a popular music professor at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas. But beneath his successful exterior, Applewhite was a man in turmoil. He struggled with his sexuality, entering into a marriage and having 2 children, only to later be fired from his university position for having an affair with a male student. He was plagued by depression and a deep sense of spiritual confusion, hearing voices and believing he had a grand, divine purpose that he could not yet grasp. In 1972, while checked into a psychiatric hospital for his mental anguish, he met Bonnie Nettles. Nettles was a 44-year-old married nurse with 4 children. She had a profound interest in theosophy, biblical prophecy, and extraterrestrial lore. She would read tarot cards for patients and was convinced that she regularly communicated with the spirits of the dead. In Applewhite, she did not see a troubled man. She saw a kindred spirit, a man of destiny. She told him that his divine purpose was not a delusion, that they had known each other in past lives, and that they had been chosen by higher powers for a crucial mission on Earth. For Applewhite, this was a revelation. Nettles gave his internal chaos a name and a purpose. Their connection was immediate and intense. They became inseparable, abandoning their families, their jobs, and their old lives to embark on a spiritual journey together. They began to refer to themselves as the Two, and later by a series of names, Bo and Peep, Guinea and Pig, and finally Do and Time, musical notes, a nod to their belief that they were messengers of a cosmic harmony. They synthesized a unique and complex theology, a bizarre fusion of Christian apocalypticism, New Age philosophy, and science fiction. The core of their belief was this: the planet Earth was a garden used by extraterrestrial beings from a higher plane of existence, which they called the evolutionary level above human, or the next level. These higher beings had planted the seeds of civilization on Earth and periodically returned to harvest the spiritually evolved. They taught that the human body was merely a container or a vehicle, a temporary vessel for the soul. To achieve salvation, one had to shed all earthly and human attachments, family, friends, possessions, jobs, sexuality, and even one's own identity, to transform or metamorphose into a new, genderless celestial being. This was the only way to be ready for collection, to be taken up into a spaceship that would transport them to the kingdom of heaven. They believed they themselves were the two witnesses described in the book of Revelation, extraterrestrial emissaries sent to Earth to deliver this final message. They began to travel across the United States in the mid-1970s, holding public meetings and recruiting followers. They were surprisingly successful. Their message resonated with a generation of spiritual seekers, people disillusioned with mainstream religion and society, who were searching for meaning in the post-Vietnam era. They offered a clear path, a structured community, and a promise of literal, physical salvation. Their first group of followers, which numbered in the hundreds, was called Human Individual Metamorphosis. Life within the group was nomadic and highly controlled. Members were given new, androgynous names, like Junity, June, or Smotty, Sam. They were required to sever all ties with their past lives. Families were torn apart as husbands, wives, and children left everything behind to follow the Two. They lived communally, traveling from campsite to campsite, awaiting the demonstration, a prophesied event where they would be assassinated by the government and then publicly resurrect 3 days later, proving their divinity before ascending into a UFO. When this demonstration failed to materialize, many followers became disillusioned and left. The group dwindled. Do and T, undeterred, took their remaining flock underground, becoming even more reclusive and insular. They taught that the outside world, or the human level, was a place of spiritual decay, controlled by malevolent alien forces they called Luciferians. Isolation became a key tool of control. By cutting their followers off from any dissenting voices, their bizarre worldview became the only reality. The doctrine continued to evolve, becoming increasingly focused on the denial of human nature. The biggest obstacle to reaching the next level, Applewhite taught, was the human body itself with its desires, emotions, and attachments. To overcome it, a strict regimen was enforced. Members wore shapeless, uniform clothing and had identical, short haircuts to erase individuality and gender distinction. A rigorous diet and schedule governed every moment of their day. Most significantly, Applewhite mandated absolute celibacy. He saw sexual desire as the ultimate vehicle malfunction, a Luciferian trap. This doctrine became so extreme that Applewhite himself, along with 7 other male followers, underwent surgical castration in Mexico to physically eliminate the source of their carnal urges. It was the ultimate statement of their commitment to leaving their humanity behind. In 1985, the cult faced its greatest crisis. Bonnie Nettles, T, was diagnosed with cancer and died. For a group whose leaders claimed to be immortal extraterrestrials, the death of one of them from a very human disease was a devastating theological problem. But Applewhite, now the sole leader, masterfully reframed the tragedy. He told his followers that T had not died. Her vehicle had simply worn out, and she had shed it to return to the next level ahead of them. She was now their guide in the heavens, helping to prepare the way. Her death was not a failure of their belief system. It was a confirmation of it. She had graduated. With T gone, Applewhite's control became absolute. The group settled into a more stationary, communal lifestyle, supporting themselves by running a successful web design company called Higher Source. In the early 1990s, they re-emerged into the public eye, using the nascent power of the internet to spread their message. Their website was a strange mix of sophisticated design and dense, arcane scripture. They took out full-page ads in newspapers like USA Today, announcing UFO cult resurfaces with final offer. Then, in 1995, astronomers announced the discovery of a new comet, Hale-Bopp. As the comet grew brighter in the night sky through 1996 and 1997, it became the focal point of Applewhite's endgame theology. An amateur astronomer took a photo of the comet that appeared to show a large, Saturn-like object trailing behind it. Though this was quickly identified as a background star and a photographic anomaly, the rumor spread through the burgeoning internet conspiracy community that a massive spaceship was hiding in the comet's tail. For Applewhite and his followers, this was it. This was the sign they had been waiting for over 2 decades. The spaceship had arrived to take them home. T was on board, waiting for them. The window of opportunity to exit the Earth was closing. The planet, they believed, was about to be recycled or spaded under. It was time to graduate. In the fall of 1996, the group rented the large mansion in Rancho Santa Fe. The final preparations began. They were meticulously planned and executed with the same calm, procedural logic that governed their entire lives. They updated their website with their final message to the world. They recorded hours of farewell videos. In these tapes, the members are not wild-eyed fanatics. They are calm, articulate, and often smiling. They speak with a serene conviction, explaining that they are not committing suicide. Suicide, in their doctrine, was a human act of desperation, an admission of failure. What they were about to do was something entirely different. They were exiting their vehicles in a controlled, deliberate manner to board the craft and reunite with their family in the next level. They expressed excitement and joy, like students on the eve of graduation. One woman, smiling brightly, said, "I've been looking forward to this for so long." Another member explained, "We are all very happy and willing and ready to leave this world." The exit procedure took place over 3 days, from March 24th to March 26th, 1997. They did it in waves to ensure the process was carried out correctly. The first group of 15 ingested a lethal cocktail of the sedative phenobarbital mixed into applesauce or pudding, which they then washed down with vodka to intensify the effect. As they lost consciousness, they pulled plastic bags over their heads to ensure death by asphyxiation. The next group of 15, after tidying up the scene and covering their departed friends with the purple shrouds, then repeated the procedure. Finally, the last group of 7, which included Marshall Applewhite, did the same. 2 members were left to be the last, and one of them, after assisting the other, was the final person to die. Their final act on Earth was to log out. The Heaven's Gate website remains online to this day, exactly as they left it, maintained by 2 surviving former members. It stands as a digital tombstone, a silent, eerie testament to a belief system that led 39 people to see their own deaths as a triumphant escape. The tragedy of Heaven's Gate is not one of violence or coercion in the traditional sense. No one was forced to die at gunpoint. They were guided to their end by a powerful ideology, meticulously crafted over 25 years, that systematically dismantled their identities, isolated them from reality, and replaced human connection with a shared, cosmic fantasy. They were not crazy. They were believers. And in their sealed world, the most logical, rational, and joyful act they could perform was to leave their bodies behind and catch a ride on a star. Case 2. The Jonestown Massacre, People's Temple. From the sterile, digital quiet of Rancho Santa Fe, our story now descends into the sweltering, primal humidity of the South American jungle. We travel back in time to November 18, 1978, to a remote settlement in northwestern Guyana. This place, carved out of the dense rainforest, was intended to be a paradise on earth, a socialist utopia free from the perceived evils of the capitalist world. It was named the People's Temple Agricultural Project, but it was known to its residents and soon to the entire world as Jonestown. On that single day, this self-proclaimed paradise would become the site of the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until the attacks of September 11, 2001. More than 900 people, a third of them children, would die. This was not a peaceful, willing exit. This was a massacre, orchestrated by a man who had promised his followers salvation, but delivered only death. The architect of this utopia, and its destroyer, was James Warren Jim Jones. Born in 1931 in rural Indiana, Jones was a strange and intense child, obsessed with religion and death. He would reportedly hold funerals for small animals and was a voracious reader, studying the lives of charismatic leaders like Stalin, Marx, Mao, and Hitler. He was drawn not to their politics, but to their power, their ability to command absolute loyalty and to shape reality for their followers. In the 1950s, Jones became a student pastor in the Methodist Church, but he quickly grew frustrated with its conservatism and segregation. He was a passionate advocate for racial equality, a position that was radical and often dangerous in mid-century America. He and his wife, Marceline, were the first white couple in Indianapolis to adopt a black child, and they went on to adopt children of various ethnic backgrounds, calling their diverse family his rainbow family. This commitment to integration would become the cornerstone of his appeal. In 1955, he founded his own church in Indianapolis. He called it the Wings of Deliverance, later renaming it the People's Temple Full Gospel Church. From the very beginning, the People's Temple was different. It was fully integrated, welcoming black and white congregants equally. Jones established soup kitchens, provided housing for the poor, and helped people find jobs. For many, especially African Americans fleeing the Jim Crow South and disillusioned white liberals searching for a cause, the temple was a sanctuary. It was a place of genuine community, social action, and radical hope. And at its center was the charismatic, dynamic Jim Jones. He was a powerful preacher, his sermons a fiery blend of Pentecostal fervor and socialist doctrine. He performed faith healings, seemingly curing congregants of cancer and other illnesses. These healings, it would later be revealed, were elaborate hoaxes, staged with the help of loyal insiders using planted tumors made of chicken gizzards and other tricks. But to his followers, they were miracles. They were proof that he was a divine, anointed leader. He began to demand more from his flock. He insisted they call him Father or Dad. He claimed to be the reincarnation of figures like Jesus, Buddha, and Vladimir Lenin. His theology shifted away from traditional Christianity, which he now openly mocked as a tool of oppression, towards his own brand of apostolic socialism. The Bible, he said, was a lie. He was the only God his followers needed. His control became all-encompassing. Members were expected to donate all their property and income to the temple. They worked long hours for the church, often for no pay. He arranged marriages, ordered divorces, and took control of raising the children, who were often disciplined more harshly by the community than by their own parents. He enforced loyalty through a combination of love and fear. He created an us versus them mentality, teaching that the outside world was racist, corrupt, and bent on destroying their beautiful egalitarian community. To leave the temple was not just to leave a church. It was to betray the cause, to abandon your family, and to step back into a world of pure evil. He used public humiliation to keep people in line. During long marathon services, he would force members to confess to sins, both real and imagined, from sexual transgressions to simple thoughts of disloyalty. He used blackmail, gathering personal information on his followers to ensure they could never leave and speak out against him. He orchestrated loyalty tests, sometimes faking his own assassination attempt to see who would remain faithful. And he was a master manipulator of sexual politics, engaging in affairs with both male and female followers, claiming it was a test of their devotion and a way to break down their bourgeois attachments. In the mid-1960s, Jones moved the temple to Redwood Valley, California, telling his followers that a coming nuclear apocalypse would destroy the Midwest. California, he prophesied, would be a safe zone. The temple's influence grew. They opened churches in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and their membership swelled to several thousand. By the 1970s, the People's Temple had become a significant political force in California. Jones could deliver thousands of disciplined, organized volunteers and voters at a moment's notice. Politicians, including some of the most powerful figures in the state, courted his support. He was appointed to the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission. From the outside, the People's Temple looked like a model of progressive social activism. But behind the scenes, Jones's paranoia, drug abuse, and megalomania were spiraling out of control. Defectors began to emerge, telling stories of physical abuse, financial exploitation, and psychological torture. The press started to investigate. Feeling the pressure closing in, Jones activated his final plan. For years, he had been preparing an escape route, a promised land, where they could build their socialist paradise far from the prying eyes of the American government and media. He had secured a remote tract of jungle in the small, impoverished nation of Guyana. In 1974, a small group of pioneers went ahead to start clearing the land. By 1977, as critical articles were about to be published, Jones ordered a mass exodus. Hundreds of his followers, many of whom were told they were just going on a vacation, were hurried onto planes and flown to South America. They arrived in Jonestown. The dream of a tropical paradise quickly soured into a waking nightmare. Jonestown was, in reality, a concentration camp. The work was grueling, from sunrise to sunset in the oppressive heat, clearing jungle and farming land that was not suited for agriculture. Food was scarce and monotonous, consisting mainly of rice and beans, while Jones and his inner circle ate well. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, not to protect the residents from outside threats, but to prevent them from leaving. All passports were confiscated. All communication with the outside world was censored. Jones's voice was inescapable. It blared from loudspeakers 24 hours a day, a constant stream of his sermons, political diatribes, and paranoid ramblings, amplified by his increasing use of amphetamines and barbiturates. Sleep deprivation was a key tool of control. He would hold marathon community meetings, known as white nights, that could last for days. During these sessions, he would stoke their fears, telling them that the CIA, the KKK, and other enemies were lurking in the jungle, ready to attack and torture them. It was during these white nights that he began to rehearse them for what he called revolutionary suicide. He would announce that they were under attack. Sirens would wail. He would tell them that death was preferable to capture, that they must die with dignity rather than submit to the fascists. He would order them to line up and drink from a vat of what he told them was poison. It was a loyalty test. After they had all drunk the liquid, he would reveal that it was only flavor aid. He was testing their readiness. He was conditioning them to obey the final command without question. He did this over and over again. Back in the United States, Concerned relatives of temple members were growing desperate. They had lost all contact with their loved ones. They heard rumors of abuse and imprisonment. They formed a group and began lobbying the government for an investigation. Their cause was taken up by Leo Ryan, a Democratic congressman from California known for his maverick, hands-on approach to fact-finding. In November 1978, Ryan announced he would lead a delegation to Guyana to visit Jonestown and investigate the allegations. On November 17, 1978, Congressman Ryan, along with a group of journalists, concerned relatives, and his staff, arrived at the Port Kaituma airstrip, the closest entry point to Jonestown. They were initially greeted with a carefully staged performance. They arrived to find a community celebrating, with music playing and people dancing. They were treated to a dinner and a show. The residents they spoke to seemed happy, insisting they were there by their own free will. But as the visit wore on, the facade began to crack. A note was secretly passed to one of the journalists. "Please help us get out of Jonestown." The next day, as Ryan's delegation prepared to leave, the truth came rushing out. About 15 temple members bravely stepped forward and asked to leave with the congressman. Jones's composure shattered. He saw this as the ultimate betrayal. While most of the defectors were allowed to board a truck to the airstrip, a fight broke out as one family tried to leave. Larry Layton, a loyal temple member, feigned defection and boarded the truck with the others. At the Port Kaituma airstrip, as the group was trying to board two small planes, the final act of violence began. The temple's armed guards, who had followed the delegation from Jonestown, opened fire on the planes. Larry Layton, already on board one of the aircraft, pulled out a hidden pistol and began shooting the people inside. The attack was swift and brutal. 5 people were killed. Congressman Leo Ryan, NBC correspondent Don Harris, NBC cameraman Bob Brown, San Francisco Examiner photographer Greg Robinson, and one of the defecting temple members, Patricia Parks. Many others were seriously wounded. The jungle airstrip was turned into a killing field. Back in Jonestown, Jones knew there was no turning back. The murder of a U.S. congressman meant the outside world was now coming for them. He gathered his followers in the central pavilion and initiated the final white night. His voice, captured on a 44-minute audio recording known as the death tape, is a chilling document of mass murder disguised as collective suicide. He told them that the planes would now come, that soldiers would parachute in and torture their children, that all was lost. "The congressman is dead," he announced. "It's all over, all over. We've got to move." He presented death not as a defeat, but as a noble revolutionary act. "We're not committing suicide," he slurred, his voice thick with drugs and paranoia. "It's a revolutionary act. We can't go back. They won't leave us alone." Vats of grape-flavored Flavor Aid, laced with a deadly cocktail of cyanide, Valium, and other tranquilizers, were brought out. A few members protested. One woman, Christine Miller, can be heard on the tape, bravely arguing, "I think we all have a right to our own destiny as individuals. I don't think it's too late for Russia." Jones shouted her down. "I don't care how many screams you hear," he commanded. "Death is 1,000,000 times preferable to 10 more days of this life." The children went first. Syringes were used to squirt the poison into the mouths of infants and babies. Their parents then followed, forced by armed guards to drink the poison. The scene descended into a hell of screaming children and weeping adults. Over 300 children and babies died. Then the adults lined up and drank from the cups. In the space of a few minutes, the pavilion and the grounds around it were littered with the bodies of more than 900 people. They died holding each other, families clinging together in their final, agonizing moments. Jim Jones did not drink the poison. He died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, a final act of cowardice. When Guyanese troops arrived the next day, they found a scene of unimaginable horror, a silent carpet of bodies, rotting in the jungle sun. The Jonestown massacre was not a mass suicide. It was a mass murder. While some may have drunk the poison willingly, convinced by Jones's final, desperate prophecy, many were forced. They were held at gunpoint, injected with poison, or coerced by the overwhelming certainty that there was no other choice. It was the culmination of a 25-year journey into madness, a journey fueled by one man's pathological need for control and his followers' desperate need for belief. Jonestown stands as the ultimate, horrifying testament to the power of charismatic evil and the terrifying vulnerability of the human desire for paradise on Earth. Case 3. The Tokyo Subway Sarin Attack, Aum Shinrikyo. We leave the humid, organic decay of the Guyanese jungle and travel to the opposite end of the human experience. The gleaming, hypermodern, and meticulously ordered world of Tokyo, Japan. Here, society is built on a foundation of collective harmony, discipline, and public safety. It was a nation that believed it had insulated itself from the kind of random, nihilistic violence that plagued other parts of the world. This collective sense of security was about to be shattered by an attack so audacious and so terrifying, it would introduce a new era of modern terrorism. This was not an act of self-destruction in a remote, hidden corner of the world. This was an act of mass destruction, aimed at the very heart of a nation. On the morning of March 20, 1995, rush hour on the Tokyo subway system was unfolding with its usual breathtaking precision. Millions of commuters, known as salarymen, moved in a disciplined, silent ballet through the sprawling subterranean network. It was the city's central nervous system, a symbol of Japanese efficiency and order. But on this morning, 5 men, members of a doomsday cult called Aum Shinrikyo, boarded separate trains on 3 of the busiest lines. Each man carried a simple package, 2 or 3 plastic bags filled with a clear, odorless liquid, wrapped in newspaper. Each man also carried a sharpened umbrella. Their targets were trains scheduled to arrive at Kasumigaseki Station, the hub beneath most of Japan's government ministries at the height of the morning rush. Their mission was to unleash Armageddon. As their designated trains approached the city center, each of the 5 men dropped his package to the floor and, with a swift jab of his umbrella, punctured the plastic bags. They then disembarked at the next station, leaving behind their deadly cargo. The liquid inside was sarin, a nerve agent developed by Nazi Germany. It is so toxic that a single microscopic drop can be fatal. As the liquid pooled on the carriage floors and began to evaporate, an invisible cloud of death spread through the trains and into the subway stations. The first signs were subtle. A cough, watery eyes. Then, commuters began collapsing, their vision blurring, struggling to breathe as their respiratory systems seized up. Panic erupted. People clawed their way out of the train cars, choking and vomiting, trampling over the fallen in a desperate stampede for the exits. The chaos spread from the trains to the platforms, and from the platforms up to the streets of Tokyo. The city's nervous system was under attack, and no one knew why or where the enemy was. By the end of the day, 13 people would be dead, and over 6,000 injured, their lives forever altered by the effects of the poison. The question that paralyzed Japan was not just who had done this, but who could even conceive of such an act. The answer lies with one man, Shoko Asahara. Born Chizuo Matsumoto in 1955, he was the son of a poor tatami mat maker. He was born partially blind and was sent to a boarding school for the blind, a rejection that festered into a lifelong resentment and a ferocious ambition. He was known as a bully, a domineering personality who craved power. After failing to get into the prestigious Tokyo University, he drifted, opening an acupuncture and traditional medicine shop. In the early 1980s, he was arrested and fined for selling fake remedies, a charlatan profiting from the sick. This failure marked a turning point. He could not achieve power through legitimate means, so he would create his own reality, a world where he was not a failed con man but a god. He embarked on a spiritual journey, traveling to the Himalayas and claiming to have achieved ultimate enlightenment. He changed his name to Shoko Asahara and, in 1984, founded a small yoga and meditation group called Aum Shinsen no Kai, which would later become Aum Shinrikyo, or Supreme Truth. Initially, Aum's appeal was understandable in the context of 1980s Japan. It was a time of immense economic prosperity, but also of spiritual emptiness. Asahara offered an alternative to the relentless materialism of modern life. He promised spiritual awakening, supernatural powers like levitation and telepathy, and a community of like-minded seekers. He was a charismatic, if unconventional, guru. His true genius, however, was in his recruitment. Aum did not just attract the lost and lonely. It targeted the best and brightest of Japanese society. Scientists, doctors, lawyers, and engineers from the country's most elite universities. These were men and women who had mastered the logical, material world, only to find it spiritually empty. Asahara offered them something their prestigious careers could not: a higher purpose, a cosmic significance. He gave them a new master and a new mission. Asahara's theology was a syncretic, apocalyptic nightmare. He blended elements of Tibetan Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christian prophecies from the Book of Revelation, creating a terrifying and urgent worldview. He taught that the world was hopelessly corrupt, on the brink of a final, apocalyptic war in Armageddon that would be triggered by the United States, whom he identified as the Beast of Revelation. He prophesied that this war would engulf the world in nuclear and chemical flames, and only the followers of Aum Shinrikyo, through their spiritual devotion and his divine guidance, would survive to build a new, perfect world. He was no longer just a guru. He was Japan's Christ, the first enlightened master since Buddha, destined to lead his chosen people through the fire. Life inside Aum became a closed, paranoid world. Followers were forced to sever ties with their families, donate their life savings, and live in isolated communes, the largest of which was a sprawling compound at the foot of Mount Fuji in a village called Kamakushiki. Here, their transformation into soldiers of the apocalypse began. They underwent brutal ascetic practices and initiation rites, some involving sensory deprivation, electroshock, and the use of hallucinogenic drugs like LSD to break down their personalities and induce visions. In a bizarre test of loyalty, they were made to drink Asahara's bathwater, his blood, or pay thousands of dollars for a sip of his hair, all of which were said to contain his spiritual power. Individuality was erased, replaced by an absolute, unquestioning devotion to the master. The cult's paranoia soon curdled into violence. In 1989, a 29-year-old lawyer named Tsutsumi Sakamoto was preparing a class action lawsuit against Aum on behalf of families whose children had been taken by the cult. Before he could file it, Asahara ordered his death. A team of Aum members broke into the Sakamoto family's apartment in the middle of the night. They murdered Sakamoto, his wife Satoko, and their 1-year-old son, Tatsuhiko. They injected the infant with a fatal dose of potassium chloride. The bodies were dismembered, placed in oil drums, and scattered in remote locations across Japan. The family simply vanished. The police investigation went nowhere. Aum Shinrikyo had committed its first perfect crime. They had learned they could kill with impunity. This act marked a critical turning point. Aum was no longer just a cult. It was a terrorist organization, willing to murder anyone who stood in its way. Asahara's vision grew more grandiose and more militant. He ran for political office in 1990 with a group of his followers, convinced he would win and take over the government. When they were soundly defeated, his paranoia intensified. He was convinced the election had been rigged by a vast conspiracy. Peaceful takeover was no longer an option. He now believed he had to seize power by force to initiate the Armageddon he had prophesied. The Aum compound at Kamakwashiki was transformed into a war factory. Using the expertise of the scientists he had recruited, Asahara began a secret program to develop weapons of mass destruction. They built a sophisticated chemical weapons plant, which they disguised as a prayer hall, and began producing tons of sarin, along with other nerve agents like VX and taboon. They attempted to cultivate anthrax and botulism. They tried to buy a nuclear warhead on the black market and purchased a Russian military helicopter, disassembling it to learn how to build their own. Asahara was no longer just predicting the apocalypse. He was manufacturing it. In June 1994, Aum conducted a dress rehearsal for the Tokyo attack. In the city of Matsumoto, 3 judges were presiding over a real estate fraud lawsuit filed against the cult. To stop the ruling, Aum decided to assassinate them. On a quiet summer night, Aum members released a cloud of sarin gas from a converted refrigerator truck into the judge's residential neighborhood. The wind shifted, and the gas spread through several apartment buildings. 7 people died and over 500 were injured. The judges survived, but were seriously harmed. In a tragic miscarriage of justice, the police, unfamiliar with sarin, focused their investigation on a local resident, Yoshiyuki Kono, whose wife was in a coma from the attack. The media publicly vilified him. The real culprits, Aum Shinrikyo, escaped suspicion, emboldened by their success. By early 1995, the net was finally beginning to close. Police were investigating the Sakamoto disappearance and other crimes, and all roads were leading to Aum. A massive, nationwide raid on the cult's facilities was planned for March 22nd. Asahara learned of the impending raid. He decided to strike first. The Tokyo subway attack was conceived as a preemptive strike, designed to throw the capital into chaos, disrupt the police investigation, and, if all went according to his messianic fantasy, trigger the final war. The 5 men chosen for the mission were among his most devout followers. They were not mindless thugs. They were educated men, including a senior physicist and a veterinarian, who truly believed they were warriors in a holy war. They saw the commuters on the subway not as innocent people, but as part of the corrupt, sinful world that had to be purged. The aftermath of the attack was a national trauma. For weeks, Tokyo lived in fear. The public was confronted with the terrifying reality that a homegrown cult had declared war on its own country using a weapon of mass destruction. The promised raid on March 22nd went ahead. Thousands of police in hazmat suits descended on the Aum compounds across Japan. The world watched, horrified, as they uncovered the full scale of the cult's apocalyptic ambitions. Laboratories filled with chemicals, stockpiles of nerve agents, binders full of weapon schematics, and evidence of the brutal internal purges. The manhunt for Shoko Asahara himself lasted for nearly 2 months. He was finally found on May 16th, hiding in a secret, sealed-off chamber between the walls of a building at the Kamakwashiki compound. He was pulled from his hiding place, a pathetic, disheveled figure, a self-proclaimed god reduced to a coward hiding in the dark. The trials that followed lasted for years. The top leadership of Aum was systematically dismantled, with many, including the 5 subway attackers, receiving the death penalty. Shoko Asahara's trial was a bizarre circus. He often appeared in a wheelchair, muttering incoherently, refusing to cooperate. His defense claimed he was insane. The prosecution argued it was an act. In 2004, he was found guilty on 13 charges, including masterminding the subway attack and the Sakamoto murders. He was sentenced to death by hanging. After years of appeals, he and 6 other Aum leaders were executed in July 2018. Aum Shinrikyo was different from the cults that preceded it. Its ultimate goal was not self-annihilation, but global destruction. It was not about escaping the world, but about destroying it. It demonstrated that the lethal combination of a charismatic, paranoid leader, a supply of educated but spiritually adrift followers, and access to modern technology could create a new and terrifying form of terrorism. It shattered Japan's cherished sense of domestic safety and served as a chilling wake-up call to the world. The apocalypse, once just a religious concept, could now be manufactured in a laboratory. Case 4. The Order of the Solar Temple. Our final journey takes us into the heart of Europe, to the pristine alpine landscapes of Switzerland and the quiet forests of Quebec, Canada. Here, we encounter a cult that embodied a unique and deadly paradox. It was obsessed with the rituals of ancient chivalry, the esoteric wisdom of the Knights Templar, and the promise of a luminous, spiritual afterlife, yet it culminated in a series of meticulously staged, brutal, and fiery ends. This is the story of the Order of the Solar Temple, a group that sought a glorious transition to a higher plane, but found it only through murder, arson, and ritualized suicide. The Order of the Solar Temple, or OTS, was a secret society born from the confluence of 2 powerful and manipulative personalities, Joseph D. Mambro and Luc Juret. Joseph D. Mambro, born in 1924, was the group's quiet, behind-the-scenes puppet master. A French jeweler and watchmaker, he had been involved in occult and esoteric circles for decades. He was a master of illusion and ceremony, claiming to have psychic abilities and to be a reincarnated member of the 14th century Knights Templar. In 1978, he founded a commune in Geneva, which became the precursor to the OTS. He was the group's strategist, its financial controller, and the architect of its elaborate mythology. Luc Juret, born in 1947, was the public face of the order. A Belgian homeopathic doctor, he was handsome, charismatic, and a gifted public speaker. He had a magnetic personality that drew people to him, especially the wealthy and influential. Juret preached a doctrine of holistic health, environmentalism, and spiritual self-improvement. He was the recruiter, the front man who gave the order an air of legitimacy and modern appeal. Together, D. Mambro and Juret formed a potent partnership. Juret would draw in followers with his lectures on New Age wellness, and D. Mambro would then indoctrinate them into the order's secret, esoteric core. They founded the Order of the Solar Temple in 1-984, presenting it as a revival of the original Knights Templar. They claimed to be the inheritors of a secret knowledge that had been passed down through the centuries. Their theology was a complex and elitist amalgamation of New Age beliefs, Rosicrucianism, ufology, and apocalyptic environmentalism. They taught that the Earth was facing an imminent ecological catastrophe. Humanity was doomed by its own pollution and spiritual decay. But for a chosen few, the elite members of the OT sphere was a path to salvation. They believed that death was not an end, but a transit. By dying under specific ritualized conditions, their souls would be transported to a star, specifically Sirius, where they would be reborn into a new, perfect, spiritual existence, free from the suffering of the physical world. The order attracted a surprisingly affluent and educated following. Members included architects, civil servants, business owners, and even the former mayor of a Swiss village. They were drawn in by the promise of belonging to an exclusive, enlightened group, by the allure of secret rituals, and by Juret's compelling personality. The order was structured like a medieval chivalric order, with a strict hierarchy of ranks, from brothers at the bottom to the elder brothers of the Rosy Cross at the top. To advance, members were required to donate vast sums of money, which DiMambro used to fund a lavish lifestyle and to purchase properties in Switzerland, Canada, and Australia. Life inside the order was governed by DiMambro's absolute control. The rituals were the centerpiece of their world. Held in secret underground chapels designed by DiMambro, these ceremonies were elaborate theatrical productions. Members would dress in white robes adorned with Templar crosses. There were swords, altars, and chanting. DiMambro used sophisticated stagecrafted and projectors, lasers, and sound systems to create what appeared to be supernatural phenomena. He would conjure apparitions of ascended masters, which were actually holograms or his own wife and son in costume, and make holy swords appear out of thin air. For the believers, these were not tricks. They were proof of DiMambro's divine connection. They were a validation of their belief that they were part of something truly special. But behind this facade of spiritual enlightenment, a darker reality was taking shape. DiMambro was a tyrant. He dictated every aspect of his followers' lives, from their diets to their relationships. He arranged and dissolved marriages, claiming the pairings were dictated by a higher cosmic order. He controlled the group's finances, amassing a personal fortune from their donations. Most sinister was his control over the group's children. He claimed that certain children born within the cult were cosmic children, beings of immense spiritual significance. He designated his own daughter, Emmanuelle, as one of these children. But he also began to express a deep-seated paranoia about a child born to two members, Tony and Nikki Dutoit. Their infant son, Christopher Emmanuel Dutoit, was identified by DiMambro as the Antichrist, sent by rival esoteric groups to destroy the order from within. This chilling declaration would have fatal consequences. By the early 1990s, the order began to unravel. Luc Juret was arrested in Quebec for illegal weapons possession, a scandal that brought unwanted media attention. Members began to question DiMambro's authority and his use of their money. Defectors started to speak out, revealing the staged nature of his miracles. The alliance between Juret and DiMambro frayed as Juret's public disgrace diminished his value as a charismatic leader. DiMambro, whose health was failing, became increasingly paranoid and apocalyptic. He felt he was losing his grip. The utopia he had built was crumbling. He decided it was time to orchestrate the order's final, grand transit. The plan was not for a simple group suicide. It was to be a glorious, fiery departure, a voyage to Sirius that would also serve to punish the traitors and cleanse the order of its impurities. The end began in the fall of 1994. On September 30th, 1994, in a chalet in Morin Heights, Quebec, the first act of the tragedy unfolded. The target was the Dutoit family. Under DiMambro's orders, a team from the order's security service lured Tony and Nikki Dutoit to the chalet. There, they were brutally murdered. Tony Dutoit was stabbed over 50 times. His wife, Nikki, was also stabbed to death. Then, they turned to the 3-month-old infant, Christopher Emmanuel, the boy DiMambro had branded the Antichrist. The baby was stabbed multiple times with a wooden stake through the heart. It was a ritual sacrifice, a horrific act designed to purify the order before its final journey. A few days later, on October 4th, police in Switzerland were called to a fire at a farmhouse in the village of Cherry. Inside, they found a gruesome scene. The farmhouse had been converted into a secret underground temple. There, they discovered the bodies of 23 people. Some had been shot. Others appeared to have been poisoned. They were arranged in a circle, like rays of the sun, all dressed in their ceremonial robes. Many had plastic bags tied over their heads. Among the dead was Joseph DiMambro's son, Ellie. It was a scene of ritualized murder and suicide. The next day, on October 5th, another fire broke out. this time in 2 connected chalets in the ski resort of Granges-sur-Salvan, also in Switzerland. Firefighters discovered another 25 bodies. Here again, the scene was one of ritual. The victims had been drugged before dying. This time, among the dead were the leaders themselves, Joseph Di Mambro and Luc Juret. They had not been shot or poisoned like the others. The evidence suggested they died by other means before the fire was set. Sophisticated, remote-controlled incendiary devices had been used to set all the properties ablaze simultaneously, ensuring a fiery departure. The initial belief was that this was the end. But the Order's voyage was not yet complete. Investigators found letters left behind by the deceased, explaining their actions. They were not dying, they wrote, but leaving this earth to escape the hypocrisies and oppression of this world. They believed they were pioneers, traveling to a new dimension of existence. The horror, however, was not over. More than a year later, in December 1995, the cult claimed another 16 victims. In a clearing in the Vercors Mountains near Grenoble, France, the charred bodies of 16 members were found arranged in a star formation. They too had been shot and then burned. Among them were several children. Investigators determined it was another ritual murder-suicide, carried out by the remaining loyalists. The final act occurred in March 1997, just days before the Heaven's Gate suicides in California. In the small town of Saint-Casimir, Quebec, a house owned by the Order burst into flames. Inside, firefighters found the bodies of 5 more members. They had left behind their children, who were found alive and well in another building, drugged but unharmed. The parents, in their final note, explained that they were leaving for Sirius and that their children would join them later. In total, the Order of the Solar Temple was responsible for the deaths of 74 people across 3 countries. The events were a complex and horrifying mix of murder and assisted suicide, orchestrated by a leadership that was losing control. The transits were not a collective, willing act of faith like Heaven's Gate. They were rooted in paranoia, punishment, and control. Di Mambro, facing dissent and exposure, chose to destroy his creation rather than let it fade away. He framed the end as a glorious spiritual journey, but it was, in reality, a final bloody purge. The case of the Order of the Solar Temple is a chilling study in the dangers of charismatic manipulation, esoteric elitism, and apocalyptic paranoia. It demonstrates how a belief system promising transcendence and light can be twisted to justify the most horrific acts of darkness. The members of the OTS believed they were embarking on a voyage to the stars, but their journey, orchestrated by a deluded and vengeful master, ended only in the smoke and ashes of their own funeral pyres. Heaven's Gate, Jonestown, Aum Shinrikyo, and the Order of the Solar Temple. Each story is a unique constellation of belief, control, and death. They show us that the human search for meaning, for community, and for salvation can, under the influence of a powerful and charismatic leader, be led to the most desolate of destinations. These were not all stories of suicide. They were stories of thought reform, of identities systematically dismantled and rebuilt in the image of a leader's worldview. They were stories of murder-off individuals, of families, and of the self. The legacy of these groups is a painful but necessary warning. It reminds us of the profound vulnerability that exists within the human heart, of vulnerability to promises that seem too good to be true, and to leaders who claim to have all the answers. The hundreds of lives lost in these tragedies are a testament to the devastating power of misplaced faith. They serve as a somber call to cherish critical thinking, to question absolute authority, and to remember that the path to any true salvation can never be paved with the surrender of one's own mind. Thank you for joining us at the Crime Folio. Sleep well if you can.